Hey guys, it's Alec Torelli, and in this video, we're gonna talk about how to play Texas Hold'em. Now, this is not a video for the rules specifically, but the basic intro strategy. Welcome to the Conscious Poker YouTube. If you're new here, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button because we put out a ton of content to take your poker game to that next level. All right, now let's dive in. The first thing you want to know about how to play No Limit Hold'em, how to play Texas Hold'em, is just the basic strategy. And the first principle, the first idea you want to keep in mind is position. And to be positionally aware. And what that basically means is that the position that you are in relative to the button will dictate the types of hands that you can play. So there are very few hands in poker that you're going to play absolutely regardless of what is called the situation. And the situation basically means the position. Those hands are obvious. Aces, kings, queens, ace, king. You're always going to be playing these hands. The rest of the hands, the majority of the hands that you decide to play, in fact, will be based on the position you are in relative to the button. And the general rule is that the closer you get to being in position, meaning the closer you are to the button, the more hands you can play. And while the exact amount of hands you're going to play will vary by a lot of factors like the difficulty of your table, the stack sizes. If you're playing a tournament, it'll be based on how close you are to the money, all sorts of other factors that are slightly more advanced. The basic rule is that from the earliest positions, you're going to be playing very, very select groups of hands. So only your absolute monsters, your top 10% of hands, pairs like nines or better, and strong suited Broadway hands. You really want to be avoiding most offsuit hands with the exception of maybe ace king and ace queen because they just don't play well in multi-way pots and you have a lot of players behind you, so you have to be very cautious. More likely than not, if you're unsure about what to do, you should just fold. The general rule is if you have a hand that's strong enough to play, you're going to be aware of what hand, you're going to be aware that that hand is strong enough to play, and therefore you can play that hand. So under the gun, meaning first position, second position, third position, in a full ring, meaning nine-handed cash game, you're going to be playing maybe 10% of hands at the most. 10% is not many. Here's a screenshot up here of what 10% looks like. It's a very narrow select group of hands. You can see them highlighted in yellow, just not that many hands you're going to be playing. Now, as you move to the later positions, you can afford to play more hands. So what is considered middle position, meaning like the fourth, fifth, sixth position, you can open up a bit and maybe play up to 15% of hands. Then in specific positions like the cutoff, meaning one to the right of the button, and the button, you can play maybe 25 and 40% of hands respectively. So you can actually open up a lot wider and you can play maybe 4 times as many hands from the button as you can play from the first position. Now, the one exception to this rule is the big blind. And the reason is that you are getting a great price because you already have one big blind in the pot. And also you're closing the action, meaning if you call a raise from the big blind, assuming nobody limps behind you, nobody has limped in early position, you're the one that is the last to act. So you guarantee you're going to see the flop. Now that is very valuable. Guaranteeing you're going to see the flop means you're going to be able to see those next 3 cards. You don't have to worry about someone re-raising behind you. So the one caveat to the rule is the big blind, and you can definitely play a wider range of hands from that position. Now that you know the relationship between position and starting hands, you want to aim to play as many hands in position as possible. So if you, for example, raise a pot pre-flop and you get re-raised by someone who is in position against you, meaning they act after you, you want to be very, very cautious here. You only want to play hands that are very easy to play post-flop, hands like middle pairs that can flop a set or 3 of a kind, in which you can easily play a big pot with confidence, or extremely premium hands like aces, kings, ace, king, queens, etc. If you get re-raised and you are in position, meaning you act last, now you can widen things up a little bit. You can afford to play more hands because you will act after your opponents. So the idea here is that whoever is in position is on offense. I want you to think about like a basketball game. If you are in position, you have the ball. You're the one that has an easier chance of scoring. And this is because you act after your opponents. Now, poker is a game of incomplete information. And every time your opponent makes a decision, takes a certain action, whether he bets or checks or raises or calls, you have additional information about the strength of his hand. When you're in position, you get that information first. So it allows you to play more hands. It's more likely that you're going to win the pot because you're more likely to get to the river. You're more likely to get to the end of the hand and get to showdown and see if you have the best hand. So play as many hands in position as possible, and when you are out of position, whether it's pre-flop or post-flop, remember that you're on defense and proceed with caution. The next poker strategy you want to utilize is understanding pre-flop play. Now, the first basic rule of pre-flop play is that you never want to limp in the pot. You always want to be coming in for a raise. So the rule of thumb is if your hand is strong enough to play, you should raise with it. Now, this is a simple mistake that I see so many poker players make is they have a hand and it's not really a great hand, but it's not a terrible hand and they want to play it. So they'll just decide to limp in and they'll call. Then someone will raise behind them. Now they're stuck calling the raise and now they're out of position, which is, remember from before, position is really important. You always want to be in position. And they don't have the lead in the hand. So after the flop, they just check, the other guy bets, they don't flop anything, and they fold. They just lose money in this way. They bleed slowly. This is something you definitely want to avoid. Common hands that I see people limping early position that they shouldn't are hands like Jack-9 suited. People love these very small pairs and these suited connectors because you could win a big pot with them if you do get lucky. But the return on your investment is not worth it. In other words, the amount of times you get lucky is not worth it relative to the amount of times you're going to have to fold, especially given what we talked about with position. So you definitely have to fold these hands. If your hand is strong enough to play, come in for a raise. That is the first principle of pre-flop play. The second principle is that when you have strong hands, you want to be re-raising pre-flop with those hands. I see too many players that have strong hands and they just call because they don't want to play a big pot. They want to see the flop. And what they end up doing is two things. First is they let a lot of other players in the pot behind them. And all these other players are now competing for the same amount of money. So the odds that you're going to win that pot go down and you're letting these other players come in the pot with worse hands essentially for free or for very little money, and they're all competing for your equity. They're competing for that same money that you're competing for, and so you're giving them a great price to do that, and you're allowing them to show a profit by calling with all these hands. The second thing you do by just calling is you give up the lead in the hand. Now, having the lead, meaning the betting advantage, being the aggressor, is very important, especially if you're in position. So really what you want to look for is you want to combine the fundamentals of pre-flop play with position. And what you want to do is you want to be the aggressor. You want to be the one in the lead while you are in position. So a great situation to be in is late position, you get a strong hand, someone raises in front of you or someone limps in front of you. Instead of limping or just calling their original raise, you want to now re-raise here and force them out of the pot. You give yourself two chances to win. One is you win by everybody folding, which is huge. You can win the pot right away. The second is you win the pot post-flop by betting when they don't have anything. So let's take a simple example. Let's say they raise pre-flop, you just call with your ace-queen, and the flop comes down king high, they bet, and you fold. You lose this pot. But let's say they raise pre-flop and you re-raise with your ace-queen, and now they just call. The flop comes down king high, they check, you now bet because you're the aggressor, you're representing strong holdings, and you bet to try and win the pot. Now, if they don't have anything, you force them to fold. So you can see the same exact hand plays out two different ways depending on who is in position and who has the betting lead. So really what you want to look for is to be aggressive pre-flop. You want to apply pressure, apply aggression, because it gives you an immediate opportunity to win the pot and it forces other players with weaker hands out of the pot. The third strategy you want to adopt to improve your no limit hold'em game is to play the player. One thing you want to realize is that the correct strategy is different depending on each and every player you're playing against. So you want to aim to identify the tendencies and the betting patterns of your opponents and then play a strategy that is the best suited against them. So let me give you two examples. Let's say you're playing against a weak, passive calling station. This person limps in a ton and loves to call bets, and he really never folds. Well, the correct strategy against a player like that is to play really strong hands, play aggressive when you're in position, isolate them pre-flop by raising a lot and forcing them to call, putting money in with inferior hands, and then playing straightforward pre-flop, betting when you flop a strong hand, continuing to bet and apply pressure on the turn and the river with strong hands, and really not bluff them that often. You also might take a very exploitative approach and just bet bigger when you have a stronger hand because you know they're going to call regardless. So why not just get the most amount of value and bet bigger? If you're debating between betting $30 and $40, just bet 40. They're going to call both size bets. Why would you ever bet less? You're just giving away money, right? Or you're missing the opportunity to win money. So that is a strategy against that player. And although that strategy is very basic, it's going to work very well. One thing I always tell my clients is if you imagine you're playing a sport like basketball, and let's say you're a tall basketball player playing against someone that's very short and they're not very talented, you're not going to sit there and shoot 3-pointers. Why would you do that? You just drive the ball to the basket and shoot layups. They can't guard you. And if your strategy that you need to win is that basic against another player, why would you complicate things? Don't shoot a 3-pointer or a fadeaway jump shot when a layup will suffice. Anything else is just ego getting in the way of one trying to demonstrate their superiority. And that's not going to serve you well at the poker table. Now, if you're playing against a different type of player, one that is aware of positional situations, one that's aware of how to hand read, how to figure out what you're holding, he bluffs sometimes, he value bets sometimes, you're going to have a different strategy against that player. You can't just raise him and then bet the flop and bet the turn and run him over because he's going to play back at you. He's going to start mixing in some raises. He's going to be bluffing you. He's going to call you down when your betting line doesn't make sense. So you're going to have to play on one level against one opponent and a completely different level against a different opponent. And here's one simple strategy I see so many poker players get wrong. They aspire to play poker on the highest level, as if that is the ultimate goal. It's not. The goal is not to play poker on the highest level. It's to play one level higher than your opponents. So if your opponent's on level 1 and he's only playing his own 2 cards and he calls every time he has a strong hand and folds every time he has a weak hand, be on level 2. Bet when he checks, and when he calls you, stop betting unless you have something. That's it. That is shooting the layups against a very bad opponent. That's all you need to do. When you're playing against great players, really good competition that are tough, that are balanced, that are difficult, you're going to have to adopt a better strategy. You're going to have stronger fundamentals. You're going to have to do what's called mixing up your play, which means some of the time you're going to need to bluff and some of the time you're going to need to bet with strong hands so that you're not too predictable. The next strategy to help you improve at Texas Hold'em is bluffing. Now, what I see more often than not are people that bluff too often. And especially at smaller stakes poker in live games, people don't like to fold. If someone has called a bet pre-flop and on the flop and on the turn, they're probably not going to be folding that often unless they have completely missed a draw and they don't have anything. If they have some sort of top pair, they're probably not going to be folding. And this is a very loose generalization, and I understand that it doesn't apply all the time, but I would recommend people to keep their bluffs to a minimum and mostly stick to betting with stronger holdings. So you could pick certain types of players to bluff like we talked about before and bluff in smart situations. Pick the best opportune times to bluffs. So when you are the aggressor pre-flop, when you're in position, when your opponent has shown weakness by checking. When you've picked your player that is a very passive player, very timid, and they rarely call unless they have a strong hand, that is a great time to bluff. Maybe try bluffing once, try bluffing twice, but if your opponent is calling you down multiple times, it's typically not wise to go for that last bluff because you're throwing good money after bad. So one of the marks of a good player is that they can pull in the reins. They can evaluate each situation uniquely. They can admit they're wrong and not let their emotion try and chase the situation. So I would say ratio of the time that one should be bluffing, it's probably like 20% of the time. So I would say most people bluff half the time because they play too many hands to begin with. Their pre-flop play fundamentals aren't strong. They end up playing too many hands, and then to compensate for that, most of the time they don't have anything because they're playing all these wild cards, and then they end up bluffing too often. And this is a disaster of a strategy. And it leads to your opponents picking you off, calling too often against you, and you just end up losing money. So bluff a lot less if you want to win more money at poker. The next strategy, which is the opposite of that, is to bet more when you have strong hands. A lot of people I see like to slow play. And while that is a good strategy in certain situations, it's a bit more advanced, it's more nuanced, and you have to know when you're doing it and why. You have to be doing it against a better player or to make yourself more unpredictable. But most of the time against weaker competition, especially against players that like to call too many bets, you should be applying a lot of pressure when you have strong hands post-flop. So if you flop a big hand and there's a lot of draws out there, when they bet, you should be putting in a big raise. You should do this whether you're in position or out of position, and you want to be building a pot and trying to get more money in when you are a favorite. Just think about it this way. Every situation is an opportunity for you to decide how much you want to risk. And the way you make money at poker is by putting in more money when the odds are in your favor. It sounds simple, but many people forget this in practice. So when you have a hand that is mathematically likely to be the best hand, you flop 3 of a kind, or you have 2 aces on a 7-4 deuce board, you want to be putting in money in those situations. Sure, you might be beat some of the time, but in the long term, those are the situations where you're statistically likely to have the best hand, and that is how you win money at poker. The next strategy, which is a little bit more advanced, is to have an overall game plan. Now, this is more important against slightly better competition, and it's about thinking 1 street or 2 streets ahead. So, for example, if you decide to bet the flop, or you decide to call a bet on the flop, think about what you're likely to do on the next card, on the turn, or think about what you're likely to do if you can on the turn and the river. So instead of just saying, oh, I have this hand, I'm going to call the flop, think about, okay, I'm going to call this flop, but if he checks the turn, then I'm going to bet. So now you're going to level 2. And just that thought in anticipation of what your opponents are going to do is going to force you to think about unique situations that may arise. And the art of planning for them is going to make you more prepared when they come. And I've noticed in working with clients that it really helps them prevent emotional decision making in the heat of the moment. So a lot of times when they don't have a plan, you go into a situation with no plan or no premeditated thought about what you're going to do. The next card comes, your opponent bets, and now you're just kind of on the fly trying to make a decision. But if you've thought ahead on the flop about what you're going to do if your opponent bets a second time, now you're prepared for that situation. It's easier to make the decision in the moment. So not only can you potentially help yourself make a better decision, but you're more likely to implement this decision that you know is the right one because you've thought about it ahead of time. You're always free to change your mind, but it never hurts to think multiple streets ahead. And this is a great strategy to utilize both when you're in position and when you're out of position, but especially against better players. The next caveat to that, which I guess is a little more advanced, is to think about not just how you're going to play this one situation, but think about your overall game plan. So look at the situation and try and think a little bit more on the next level and say, okay, is this a situation that is favorable for me? Or is it a situation that's more favorable for my opponents? And typically you want to be applying pressure in situations that is more favorable for you. So for example, if you're the pre-flop raiser, and your opponent just calls in the big blind, the flop comes down ace, king, 5. They check. Now you're debating what to do. Well, this situation, regardless of your hand, forget about your hand or forget about their hand, forget about the type of player. Just the fact that you raised pre-flop And the fact that they just called preflop means that this situation is more advantageous to you because you can have more stronger hands than they could have. You can have pocket aces, you can have pocket kings, you can have ace king. They probably don't have any of those hands because they didn't re-raise you pre-flop. So thinking about how their actions influence the types of hands they have will help you in what's called hand reading, help you figure out the types of hands your opponent has, and then you can use that information to make better decisions. And keeping that in mind with an overall strategy, an overall game plan of how you want to play in certain situations is a great next step to take. Finally, remember that each and every situation in poker is unique. No two situations are the same, so pay attention when you're not in hands to get more information about your opponents. Try and deduce their betting patterns. Who likes to play a lot of hands? Who's very tight and conservative and is waiting for better spots? And avoid the idea of thinking, oh, I've seen this situation before, I have this hand, therefore I have to play it this way. No, always be asking yourself, what is the best play in this spot? What am I trying to accomplish? What is my goal in this hand? Who are the weaker players at the table and who am I going to make money against? What do I want to happen in this situation? And then formulate a unique strategy for that individual situation. And then be aware that when the next card comes and your opponent takes a different action, they decide to bet on this specific card, that is a whole new situation. So you have to reevaluate every time a new hand comes, every time a new card comes, every time a new bet is made. You always have to be updating things in real time. So I hope this helped. Finally, I have some great resources for you to help you on your poker journey. First off, at consciouspoker.com, we have great free blogs to help you. We have the definitive guide to Texas Hold'em strategy, as well as the definitive guide to both cash game and tournament strategy. These are great free blogs. They're very in-depth and they will really help you on your poker journey. For those that really want that next step and a linear step-by-step structure to improve on their poker journey, to take you from the basics of fundamentals all the way up to that intermediate, even advanced strategy, the Conscious Poker membership is a great program. We have a 30-day program in the beginning to help walk you through a series of videos that is meant to be consumed in a linear step-by-step order to really help you build a solid base and go a lot more in depth in all of these various subjects to help you improve your fundamentals. You can learn a lot more at consciouspoker.com. Finally, I hope you liked this video. If you do, please give it a like and a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel because more awesome content is coming your way. I'm Alec Torelli. Thank you for your attention. I'll see you in the next one.